longer run stuff. Today's episode is a Muse, more mind exploration, and it has to do with uh, impossible and hope. Impossible. What you believe is impossible, and what things you hope, what hope is. Anyway, um, impossible. Years ago, I don't know, somewhere in the 70s, there was a series of books that came out that were interesting to me anyway. It was about this fellow who was studying, I think, whatever you call it, cultures, where you study sociology, I guess, or something like that. And he had gone into Mexico and he was back in the hills away from civilization where there were still indigenous people living in a tribal sort of community. And he ran across a guy known as Don Juan. Don Juan was a shaman or a person, a medicine man, or a whatever you want to refer to him as. He, closest thing I think of is like a Buddhist monk or someone who spends a lot of time in internal mind exploration and looking at and dealing in. And of course, he lived close to the earth because he was out there every day. He never lived in a city, and he probably reclaimed some natural knowledge that we have long since wasn't genetically passed on, and we've lost it. Anyway, this sociologist or whatever he was, what kind of ologist he was, Don Juan tried to teach him some stuff. Now, later on, he introduced him to peyote as an enhancer for exploration of mental space. But initially, it was just talking. They would walk and do talks and walks. But one of the things I remember, and it was interesting at the time, and I've thought about it again, is that they had this sociologist driven his car, picked up Don Juan, and Don Juan said, "I want to take you over here. I want to show you some stuff." And they had driven over there, gotten out, and then they went for a hike. Could have been 3 hours. I have no idea. When they came back, the car was gone, and I'll call him Bob. I don't know, whatever he was. Bob was like, "Where the hell does the car go?" I mean, we're out in the middle of nowhere. I got the car keys in my pocket. Where'd the car go? Don Juan said, "You're always fretting about something or other, The car's here." "What?" And Bob looked around and said, "It's not here. You can't see it. I've looked in all directions. And this is where I parked it. I know I parked it right here." And Don Juan says, "I'm telling you, it's here." And Bob, yeah, what is this, Anyway, Don Juan says, "You haven't really looked yet." "What do you mean I haven't really looked yet?" "Well, you look underneath that rock there?" Bob says, "What sense in is that? I'm going to look underneath of a rock? The car can't possibly be under that rock. It's impossible. I mean, the car is huge. And how did it get under a rock?" And Tom was saying, "That's part of your problems, young man. You have ingrained into you what is possible and not possible. You have been taught to think that way. You rule out the impossible right off the bat." That's the central theme of today is impossibility, and that we have been taught. The best example I can think of is gravity. Nobody can fly. Well, airplanes can fly, although that still seems kind of magical in a sense. But you can't just go out and float up in air and sail around. I have in dreams before, but not. And partly is because we have a full understanding and a full belief to our core that gravity is real, and yet you can't get around it. Okay, you believe that. It is impossible for you and I to fly around. That's okay. That's very clear, and I'll give you that one. I'll stamp. Yeah, I go along with that one. I don't know why I'm having green screen usage here today, but no, I'll make me less fuzzy maybe. Anyway, I'll accept that one. But then you start thinking about it. I think Don Juan was right in that we are trained or we develop on our own from our experiences. Some things just aren't possible. They're impossible, and you don't give it a whole lot more thought than that. Uh, Back to, I've done this before, physics. I have an interest in physics, which is trying to understand where we are, what we are, when we were, how we ate. I don't know. It's that portion of physics, from quantum mechanics to cosmology to field theory, is very complicated and very mathematical. And it deals a lot with curvatures and spaces and complex spaces to model it properly. But one of the underlying things that seemed to be a problem that we haven't been able to wrap our head around yet, that in physics, although recently there's been the term quantum entanglement between, I want to say particles, now I want to say systems. Quantum entanglement, where two things become quantumly entangled, and whatever happens to one is happening at the other. They seem to be a joint at the hip, and with no viable understanding of how that is happening. It doesn't matter the distance. There is nothing what we call time separating those two things. Okay, that's an unknown at this point. The second unknown that seems to be in physics is there is a relationship between the observed and the observer. It's been going on for a long time. I think the original double slit experiment with light pointed it out with, and nobody knows how to figure that out. If you shoot a light beam through a slit, double slit, against the wall, it'll make a pattern on the back. If you don't observe it, it'll make one pattern. If you watch it, it makes another pattern. There is a relationship between the observer and the observed. Okay, so it falls into this phantom area. Okay, another link. Okay, is there a relationship between what you believe and what reality is? If you believe something is impossible, does that make it impossible? The observer and the observed. Impossible. A lot of things I think we say impossible, which are really not. For one thing, given enough time. Cure cancer, given enough time. Everybody says that's impossible. To be able to live to be 500 years old, that's impossible. Okay, given enough time, perhaps. What we one time it was impossible to throw your voice thousands of miles. Telephone, radio came along. I used to throw my voice from here to Australia across electronic, invisible electromagnetic waves through the air that you couldn't see. 1,000 years ago, that would have been totally magic. It was impossible. Not anymore. Things that you take and say are impossible, does it, in fact, limit the domain of actualities? That's the other part of physics. The farther you go into it, the more it becomes more of a probability story. Everything is a probability. It can be over here, it can be over there. In fact, it can be in any of these places at literally the same time, depending on the observer. And it's probabilities. probabilities have a time aspect to them. What's the probability of you and I being here on this planet in our organic forms that we're in? Well, the universe is 14.7 billion years old, so the chances, the random die throws of waves and chemistry and atom creations and element creations and so on and so on and so on. 14 billion years, he wound up with us. It didn't happen overnight. 470 million years ago or whatever, we had dinosaurs. We didn't have people. We had dinosaurs. But evolution and whatever, we wound up with us. Are we it? No. We're just another species like those dinosaurs, and the universe doesn't really care whether we survive or not. The dinosaurs were wiped out. Probably life even before that was wiped out once or twice, maybe by a total mass ejection from our sun in our direction, which bathed the earth in some kind of a death ray sort of thing. That's certainly possible again. We are moving, the whole galaxy is moving through space-time. Physicists want to say space-time is relatively behaves the same no matter where. It's a conjecture more than by proof, but it doesn't have to be. There are areas with black holes in them that impact space and time out a long ways. Could we move into a region that had a very black hole someplace? Yes, we could. Just those beliefs, and this is, I'll bring up the word hope. Hope is where you have a belief in something other, but apparently you have not classified it as impossible. You might think the probability of it happening is pretty slim, but there's a sliver of maybe. So you can have hope on something like that. I don't think people walk around hoping they're going to fly around one day with don't even need wings or anything or an airplane. They're just going to fly around. But we haven't explored our inner mental workings yet, and perhaps we are nothing more than a quantum entangled space-time, some sort of, it's not a black hole. We are not black holes. We're some other sort of crazy space-time anomaly, which we haven't realized that we are yet, because physicists don't really deal in genetics or in mind mechanics, the neural pathways, and everything up here. They don't. That's cross disciplines, and we haven't gotten to that point yet. The study of behavior of the neural network in your head there is research going on. Still, how do we relearn things? How do we remember things? How do we clip stuff out of our memory? All of that is fresh new territory. Again, if physics has problems with the relationship between the observed and the observer, and it has a problem that some things are different, act differently when they're observed than when they're not, I think that comes back to the consciousness aspect of being a human. We have some sort of, we are in that mix somehow in some very strange way. And I go back to the impossible again. I guess I'm saying is that perhaps you ought to periodically go through, what do you, I don't even know, I don't have a list. I've never created a list. What is impossible? One of them was you die and you can't be born or resurrected. Well, Christ did it. I mean, that's what they say. But you die and you can't be reanimated. Okay, that's impossible. You die, you got, that's it. Other impossibilities. You can't jump over the moon. Okay, it's impossible to. I don't know. I never thought about it, and I guess that's what I'm probing and perhaps suggesting to you that you ought to think about what you so firmly believe in that's impossible. Is it still impossible? Perhaps you ought to modify that. That's what Don Juan was saying in a roundabout way, that if you think it's impossible, it will be impossible. Absolutely, positively. That you have to somehow modify the concept of impossible to maybe include time in it, given enough time. Maybe include the situation. Yeah, I can't fly here, but in space, zero gravity, people fly around all the time. I don't know. Yeah, situational. In fact, in college there was an ethics class I went to one time called situational ethics, and this is a case where sometimes it's better to lie than tell the truth, and that's a weird one if you contemplate it. But there are times it's what's called situational ethics. Uh, Same way, and I always read about the Marine that a grenade lands nearby, and he's in a group of 8 other people. Instantly throws himself on top of the grenade, sacrifices himself for the group. I always thought about that. That's a strange aspect of humanity, of humans, to do that. I'm sure there was no thought. Basically, thought. There was no time for thought. He just did it. Was everything he experienced up till that point must have led him to that day to take that instant sort of action. Now, I'm not anywhere near that kind of fast in my thinking and reasoning, so on. And maybe that's a good thing because I get to ponder around the structures of the mind, and there is somewhere at some place you have some kind of bedrock belief systems or what you know to be true. And I'm saying they're not necessarily true. You've said that it's impossible. Somebody told you it's impossible. It's impossible for me to hit a home run out of Yankee Stadium, given a big league pitcher. That's impossible. It never happened. I, yeah, I'd say the probability is really high that it cannot happen. That, but in that case, I have hope. If I had a chance, I sure as hell would try. I think you ought to be like that. I think you ought to think like that. Yeah, it's highly improbable, but it's not impossible. And that little teeny bit of probability is left. You can't just throw it out. Sometimes you have to explore it. Maybe think about it. Maybe even try it or do it. Be surprised. I mean, I'm sure people have surprised themselves trying to do something they had accepted was impossible. Uh, Tesla, not the car manufacturer, but the old guy. He kept coming up doing stuff that nobody said was possible. He did all kinds of technical innovations and explorations of electrical stuff that nobody, no, it's not possible. But he did it. Anyway, enough for today. I'm exploring. This is a mental muse again. I think we don't do enough exploring internally about what's going on up here and who we are and the time we're in and how we interact with it and the interconnection between observed and observer, between quantum entanglement, that things we might be more tightly bound to each other than we think we are, but we don't have our minds open like receivers to that, or we haven't been taught anything about that, how to interpret the interplay relationships. It's a total do-it-yourself job. We don't talk about it much. We don't share ideas about it much. Anyway, that's the whole point of this one. Today is the 22nd of December 2025. I already did one today, but it was about computers. This one, what I've been thinking about, it came up today, and I won't even go into the long why it came up and why I'm exploring it. But that's it for today. I hope everybody has a great holiday, and bye-bye.